Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Safety and Health webcast. Is virtual reality disruptive innovation when it comes to safety? Sponsored by United Academy. This is Alan Ferguson, Associate Editor at Safety and Health magazine, and I will moderate today's session. Thank you all for joining us. We'll start the presentation in a few minutes, but first I want to go over some preliminary items. The views of today's speaker and organizations are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the National Safety Council or Safety and Health magazine. Any mention of a commercial enterprise, product, or publication does not mean the council or magazine endorses those items. At the end of today's webcast, we will conduct a question and answer session. To ask a question, simply type it in the text box in the lower left-hand corner of your screen and click the button for Submit Question. Feel free to ask your question at any time during the presentation. You don't have to wait for the question and answer session to begin. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible, but because of the large number of participants today, we might not get to every question. Any unanswered questions will be forwarded to today's speaker. For basic troubleshooting information, click the Help button located on your screen. At the end of the webcast, you'll be asked to complete a brief evaluation survey, and I will let you know more about that after the presentation. This webcast is archived, so you can access it after today's live event. To view this webcast and all of our past webcasts, go to safetyandhealthmagazine.com/events. With that, let's go ahead and get started. Our speaker today is Jay Bowman, Principal with FMI Consulting. In his current role, Jay assists a wide range of stakeholders in the construction industry with identifying and assessing the risk influencing their tactical and strategic decisions. His primary responsibilities include research, design, and interpretation based on an understanding of the context in which these organizations operate. Publications to Bowman's credit include FMI's annual U.S. Markets Construction Overview and Influencers in Construction. Jay, whenever you're ready, go ahead and take it away.
All right. Well, thank you very much. First of all, I'd just like to say good afternoon or good morning to everyone today, and also just to thank the National Safety Council and United Academy for allowing me this opportunity to share our kind of research and our opinions and views on virtual reality as a true disruptor of innovation when it comes to safety in the broadly defined engineering and construction industry. Just a little bit quickly kind of about myself, you could say that I kind of occupy a unique seat at FMI. I'm kind of situated, as it were, sort of at the crossroads of kind of many different questions that are posed to us, being here on the research side of FMI. And I can tell you that the questions that, in my 20 years at FMI, the questions that have been asked to me, say over the past, say 2 to 3 years, are markedly different than any that I heard really in the 17 to 18 years prior. And I would actually kind of summarize these questions that our clients and others are asking us is, how do I get out of the contracting business? Now, I say that somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but, they're not really truly asking how do I get out of the engineering or construction industry. Rather, what they're really asking is, how they can challenge the business models, the way of doing things, to really position their organizations for success in a coming future that they do not see as being kind of like the one that they're currently in or even have been in the past. And, when we think about this and the technology side of things as being a catalyst for this, I truly believe that the construction industry will bear little resemblance to kind of what it looks like now in 20, 25 years from now. And perhaps an example of the type of shift or change that I see occurring is one that any one of us is personally close to, if it were, and that's really if you think about the phones. And so if you think, back in the early 1980s, that was the introduction of the very first true cellular telephone, Motorola StarTAC. And this was the phone that was sort of made famous, if you will, if you think of the movie Wall Street with Gordon Gekko standing on the beach. But at that time, 95% of homes in the United States had a landline phone. It was the normal style of communication. You fast forward, roughly 25 years, and you have the introduction of the iPhone. And now in the United States, landline phones in homes is down below 50%, and for people under the age of 30, only about 20% of them have a landline phone. And when you begin to think of the implications of that, in roughly just 20, 25 years, that type of shift, from how we interact with the technology, what the technology has opened up and allowed us to do from a productivity standpoint, from all of these things, competitors, business models, everything, is that scale of disruption that I see similarly happening in the engineering and construction space, of which what we'll be talking about today on the virtual reality side is one component of that. So today, not all the technology that we're talking about is necessarily super futuristic, meaning that it's something that's not even within our grasp today. In most cases, contractors are really looking to use available technologies now to augment or supplement current practices that they have to address, the challenges and issues that they face on a day-to-day basis. And when we think of sort of the big categories of where this is happening today, the first one really being sort of the project data and collaboration that we're probably all familiar with, but it's also incorporating things around remote monitoring. And with this conversation or this webinar being about safety, and we think about how the remote monitoring, for example, in the electrical field, how that keeps people outside the arc flash zone, those types of things. Data analytics, not just for the way in which they're doing their projects, but even just in the management of their business. And then last, and a big component of this is actually on the training side. And it's really this last one that, that technology impact on training that I want to talk specifically about today. And this is research that we've done in partnership with Sirius Labs and several others. And it's really our belief that virtual reality in general and immersive virtual reality specifically will truly transform equipment operator training in the very near future. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we mean by immersive virtual reality, but this goes beyond just we think about learning on a TV screen or a computer screen. This is a fully immersive experience for the trainee. And so when we consider some of the things that are motivating these changes or leading to these, we look at some things like increasing project complexity, schedules becoming more and more shorter, having to get more done sooner, and even greater congestion. And even when we look at our forecast just for the United States, and we look over the next 3 to 5 years, one of the things that we noted is that 50% of all construction activity over the next 5 years will occur in just 20 metropolitan markets. And moreover, just 5 will make up 1/5 of total construction in the U.S. So these include places like New York, Los Angeles, Dallas, Houston, and Washington, D.C., all very sort of congested urban areas. And each one of those markets will have more than $30 billion worth of construction spending put in place there. And if you want to put that into further perspective, each of those markets represent more construction spending than what's projected for the entirety for states like Massachusetts, Michigan, Oregon, and Tennessee. And then you think about the skilled labor shortage and how virtual reality, or particularly immersive virtual reality, will come into play. The census, is already saying that 10,000 baby boomers retire every single day. And even a recent study that we did of looking at actually stonemasons, the number of stonemasons employed in the U.S. has declined by almost 50% over the past 10 years. And so with that skilled labor shortage, with the type of work, the congestion, et cetera, and we think about equipment operators, it's not just about the number of people that we need to bring in and train properly and equip them with the capabilities they need, but it's the speed by which that training needs to occur in order to make up for the loss of the experienced people. In many ways, we also look at immersive virtual reality as a training option is a true complement to traditional methods. We're not here today necessarily to say that this replaces traditional methods. Rather, it enhances that. It allows us to do things that traditional methods may not allow us to do. So some of the experiential learning, and you'll hear a lot of folks that, particularly in the field that we talk to, is you learn sometimes more from your mistakes than you learn from the actual successes. But when we think about what the mistakes may be in a construction job site, we want to avoid those obviously as much as possible. But being able to recreate those potential mistakes or whatever in a safe environment from a virtual reality perspective can really help complement those methods. Moreover, it really reflects the next generations of workers' expectations. They live a life of technology, and they're not going to just come to the construction industry or to a job site and just immediately disengage from how they live their life everywhere else. So we see that this approach to training is a very attractive one to new people. Improve safety. I mean, you're training without consequences. In many cases with the addition of virtual reality, which is perhaps the most paramount component of this. And then the unique performance metrics, being able to measure things that heretofore really weren't possible, like eye movement and what people are looking at and hand-eye coordination, all of these things that through a virtual reality and digital platform, we can truly measure and understand how quickly people are grasping different concepts, and then just the speed to competency. So as you can see, or as we believe, that virtual reality, particularly this immersive virtual reality, really will be a critical component of operator training as we move forward into the future. So, taking responsibility for worker safety, as we all know, is just of the most paramount importance to all of us who work in the construction industry. And when I think of the hundreds and perhaps thousands of clients FMI has worked with and those that I've personally encountered with, most, if not all, safety is a core value that these companies profess, and that's is a right core value. When we think of what a core value or what core values represent, these are the fundamental beliefs of a person or a company. They guide our principles. They dictate our behaviors and help us understand the difference between right and wrong, or in the case of a business, the right way to do things or the wrong way to do things. And they help us determine if we're on the right path to fulfill our goals. So if safety is a true core value, then think of what are we doing then to ensure a greater achievement of safety going forward. And some of these statistics you may already be familiar with, but when we think that 10% of construction workers are injured every year according to OSHA statistics, and that of that falls are really the greatest cause of fatal construction injuries, and that 60% of construction workplace injuries occur with the employee's first year of employment. Those different aspects of how we help to reduce these types of occurrences within the industry. There's defensive ways to do it, the things that we do like fall protection and other things, but there also should be an offensive component to incorporating safety into our businesses. And we believe that using this virtual reality is one of those offensive approaches to improving the safety by letting people experience and see things and learn things in a better method that complements, again, the traditional training, but truly allows us to kind of begin to set the stage before they even set out the first day onto the site. And I think we're all familiar with. Excuse me, I'm sorry, got ahead of myself. So when we think about then the virtual reality component of this, this really is how we look at it, is how technology is really redefining what we do, how we do things, how construction takes place. And we see this in a whole host of different areas, but it's truly the kind of the convergence, or we're all familiar with the convergence of engineering, construction, services for many years, whether it's been sort of the design build aspect or other things. But now what we're really seeing is how that technology is really converging into the construction industry as well. And as these become kind of increasingly intertwined between the technology and with construction, it's going to take a whole new approach to how things might be done. So we see this whether it's an artificial intelligence that's being used, either trying to replicate or replace the knowledge work task, modularization and prefabrication, which has been one of the fastest growing parts of the industry, actually faster growing than overall construction spending, the 3D printing, autonomous vehicles, what that could mean, the advanced robotics, virtual reality, which is obviously a huge component of this, and the Internet of Things. You can see that all of these in some way are really addressing some of those challenges that I was mentioning earlier, whether it's from a skilled labor perspective, but also from a safety perspective. So when we think of how can we either remove individuals from dangerous situations, or we can improve or enhance the ability to be safe, again, I see virtual reality as being a major component or addition to that. So when we think about who's really behind this and what's going to occur with this, and where technology really is truly potentially going with all of this, you only need to take a look at where venture capitalists are putting their money. And over the last several years, they've invested close to $1 billion in construction technology. And the majority of those investments have been in sort of these first two segments of project and task management, collaboration, and in robotics. And I've just kind of shown just examples of some of the companies that they've put their money into. But one of the things that venture capital does well is sort of cross-pollinating investments. In other words, they're bringing industry outsiders who've been able to solve problems in other industries to look at how things may be done differently in the new ones. And they're also sort of champions of innovative technologies and are willing to try new things. And so when we think about, particularly even taking virtual reality now, applying it to the construction industry, this is a form of training and of skills development that's been widely used in many other industries. Think of the airline industry, for example, and with pilot training, et cetera. What's the challenges if you crash an airplane, learning to fly a plane, in the safety of learning some of those skills from a virtual reality standpoint. But in all of these, we do see where we're augmenting or trying to accelerate productivity, both from a hard skills and a soft skills aspect. And again, virtual reality being a major component that we see applying to this. This is just a collection of different articles that I pulled stemming from back to the 1980s all the way up through the current year. And really what it shows is that when we talk about the skilled labor challenge within the construction industry, and we say, well, it's nothing new, it truly isn't anything new. This has been something that we've written about and talked about for going on now 30, 40 years. And it would be hard-pressed to kind of look at any of these articles and switch the dates and know which one was old and which one is new. So we continue to see that this is an issue that is not going to go away, and the likelihood that we're going to be able to regain those folks, particularly in light of what I shared earlier about 10,000 baby boomers retiring every day. When we look at what we would have to replace just in the United States, it's more than 1.2 million people that we're going to lose over the next 15 years. And to get these people back would really require hiring 1 in 6 of all currently unemployed people in the labor force. And the likelihood of that occurring, obviously, is just not likely. So you can look back over these past 3 years, and the shortage of skilled labor has perhaps been the most consistent message within our industry. And almost all of these articles that I have listed here and the reports that have come out, they all kind of recommend the same thing about hiring more people, whether that might be minorities, bringing women, bringing other people into the industry. And I'm all for this. I think it's great, but the reality is this does not solve the problem. To give you an example, the percentage of women that were in the construction industry in 1980 was roughly 15%, and last year it was roughly 15% as well. So then the question becomes, how are contractors utilizing technology to address this? So again, it's not that finding more people is the only answer. It's not. We have to do other things. And in the contractors that we have worked with, there's really four major things that we have seen them do in order to utilize technology to address the skilled labor shortage. The first one is analyzing workflows and the collection of field data in real time, trying to understand how does work take place, how can I become more productive by either taking steps out of it, etc. The second one is augmenting, and so it's using things like modularization and prefabrication to replace many of the skilled but replicable trades. Pipe bending is an example of this that we see. And when you consider that 40% of the homes in Sweden are prefabricated, that itself sort of reflects on the same challenge that they have. Is to be able to do more in less time with fewer people. The third thing that we see is really automating different aspects of the job that don't require human involvement or require a lot less of it. And the fourth thing that we really see, and these weren't necessarily in order, but that we see many people, is accelerating the knowledge and skills development through technology. And in some of the companies that we have interviewed and studied that have incorporated virtual reality, that speed of accelerating that knowledge and skills development has been nothing short of really, truly amazing. So then, why would you bring virtual reality into your operator training or equipment operator training? Well, for one, we find regardless of the type of training activity that takes place, in an industry study that FMI conducted last year, the full report is available on our website, what we found was that the majority of people do not find their training and development programs to be very effective. On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 was not effective at all and 10 was very effective, the average was actually about a 5.8. And it really sort of reminds me of a quote by Mark Breslin, who's CEO of United Contractors, where he said that, what other industry turns over hundreds of millions of dollars of work to guys that they do not prepare adequately for the job? Only in construction. More importantly, how much longer can we fool ourselves around the critical conclusion that field leaders in this critical profit leadership position need new skills, tools, and strategies? And I agree with him in that sense, that they really do need to bring in new skills and particularly new tools and strategies from a training perspective. And when we think about, why do people tell us that they don't find their training and development programs very effective, it really comes down to a relatively sort of consistent list of issues. The first one being engagement. How do we engage people? How do we motivate people to want to really participate in that training, where they're not just a bystander or an onlooker, but they're actively engaged in the learning process? That's a huge component, and it's actually one of the ones that people say is becoming more and more of an issue with the change in generation, of being able to hold attention and engage them. The second area that we find a lot of issue with is around feedback, being able to really understand, how truly effective is it? Do we feel like the knowledge and the skill sets are being retained? How are we measuring those things? Timing and frequency of training was the third area that was a really big reason why people felt that their training and development programs weren't effective. Trying to, as we were showing earlier, with projects becoming much more shorter in duration and the requirements upon them, trying to take time for training can be very difficult in many cases. And then only one time, What about going back and trying to get more and more refreshers, or what's required? But timing and frequency was another one. Another area that was simulation. The training in many cases today doesn't allow for the trainee to really experience everything that could occur. Again, like I was saying, when people learn from mistakes or learning different situations, how do we simulate different aspects that people may encounter in the field so that it's not one of those things where you just learn over time, but how do we take that resident body of knowledge among the more skilled and senior people and translate it to the newer ones? And then retention of knowledge, obviously, and then last was just cost. Like what the cost of training may be for a particular individual. But these were some of the reasons, again, why. And what I hope to show you is how virtual reality or immersive virtual reality training, particularly for equipment operators, can really provide solutions or opportunities in each one of these areas. But the first one, truly about the engagement, which is, the one that was perhaps the most often cited reason for people being disappointed with the training and development programs that they have currently, is to look at the generations. And really what we're talking about are the post-millennials. These are the people who are really just coming out of college now. So they're right behind the millennials. And you would really have to accurately describe them as the first true digital generation. Now, they do have several similarities that they share with millennials and Generation X and even baby boomers, but there's also some differences. And I just wanted to kind of demonstrate here just kind of where those are similar and where some of those may be different. So, in the sense that they value personal relationships similar to prior generations, but the difference being that social media highly influences those relationships and how they think. I mean, you look at, more and more children are putting off getting their driver's license. Well, why? Because, when I was young, I had to drive somewhere to see my friends. But these people, they're so used to using social media that they can connect with their friends that way. They're also highly entrepreneurial, similar to past generations. But in that sense, they've never lived without the internet, without smartphones, without tablets, any of those things. So their view of entrepreneurialism has more of a technology bent to it, or a underlying foundation of technology than perhaps some of the prior ones. In other words, they're really looking for technology to be the solution in their entrepreneurial efforts. Other things is that, I think one of the things that you hear about some of the younger generation is that, they don't want to stay with a company, that they're bouncing around, but actually a lot of the research shows, and even some of the research that FMI did on our millennial study, was that the majority actually expect to stay more than 5 years at the current employer. So they do have that sense of loyalty. But on the other hand, they don't expect to learn the hard way. Again, they're eager to use technology, and the idea of it taking them years and years to establish a competency or even a true skill set, they want to learn it as quickly and as fast as possible. And immersive VR is one way, particularly with equipment operators, to help them that goes beyond this kind of quote-unquote hard way. And then the last one I would want to check on, if you can read through some of these others yourself as well, but it's about the training. So you can see that training is important to the past generations that we've worked with, but also even to the millennials and post-millennials. But if you look at some of this difference, the boomers, the quote we'll hear is, you train them too much and they'll leave. The millennials saying, well, continuous learning is a way of life. But when we think about, equipment operator, well, how can you do continual learning? We have to use this equipment, for our, regular jobs and that sort of thing. We can't just keep equipment sitting to the side for training purposes all the time. And again, that is where the virtual reality can come in, by providing that continuous learning, by setting up multiple situations, scenarios, environs, etc., for these people to continue to learn. So when we think about the other aspect about the equipment operator being demanding, We recently completed a survey with Sirius Labs that was specifically about immersive virtual reality for equipment operator training, and it included interviews with several who have actually used the program as well. And if you kind of go back to, again, what we've been talking about with these problems of ineffective training, consider some of the statistics that came out of our survey. For the people who participated in this, the average percent of field staff time that was spent on training equipment operators was roughly 46%. So almost half the time they're saying of their field staff was really, geared towards, trying to train. That training might vary in different, how intensive it was, but a considerable amount of their time was in training those equipment operators. Then you look at the average percent of operator training that occurs on company-owned equipment. Almost, a little over a third of that training is on equipment that the company owns. So that's a third, or you think about the time that takes away from actually the work itself. And then last, just thinking about the space requirements. And we were talking a little bit earlier about more congestion and everything else. But specifically for aerial lift and mobile elevated work platforms and crane operators, the average number of square feet they felt that was needed, and this could range, but the average was roughly 25,000 square feet. And so you begin to put these things into place, and again, you can see how demanding it truly is, for someone to do that. So with schedules being more compressed, with greater congestion, with the need to speed up the competencies, etc. These things take a serious toll, as you can imagine, on the ability to do the work. And then there's, not to also skip over, but, just the cost of some of the traditional training methods. Similar to, what we're showing with training methods of the, kind of just normal kind that people felt that weren't effective. When we looked at traditional training methods for equipment operators, we saw many of the same things. And part of it was really trying to understand, well, what's the true cost, not only of, the training itself, but the incidental cost if there was an issue. And for the people who participated in the survey, the incident rate per month during the first year for newly trained operators was about 25%. And then you take that and you look at, okay, well, how often did those incidents include equipment damage during live training? And again, almost a quarter of those live training exercises ended up with equipment damage. And then you say, well, okay, how much is the average equipment damage cost during that live training? And it came out to roughly $500 to $2,500 for each time the equipment was damaged on average. So you begin to do the math, and if you take a company and you think of roughly, how many newly trained equipment operators might I have? And then I start to do this type of math, I can begin to see, how much this truly may be costing my firm, not just from a training perspective, from the cost of, having not the best outcomes, if you will, from this incident rate, equipment damage, and cost perspective. So how does immersive, virtual reality really change the paradigm, if you will, of what we're talking about? Well, again, the way that I see it currently, and this is again based on interviews with the individuals who are actually using this today, is a true complement to traditional training methods, and actually improves the traditional training methods. So we're not talking at this point about replacing traditional methods, but complementing those. And when we talk about immersive virtual reality, I wanted to share this with you so that you had a sense of really kind of what we're talking about as being very different from, just you think about, working on a computer screen or a TV screen. And some of these are screenshots, but if you take a look at the person in the sort of middle picture there, when we say immersive, it's not just the virtual reality headset itself that allows you to view 360 degrees, but it's on equipment that mimics the feel and movement of the actual piece of equipment. So I'm getting feedback not only from being able to visually see what I'm doing, but also the feel of the equipment moving and how it would be in real life, whether that's with an aerial lift or it might be with a crane. And with the pictures on the left-hand side of the screen, for example, this is what I was saying. You can create multiple scenarios. You could create different types of construction sites. We can add in different things, wind, whatever it may be, in order to really mimic what someone might encounter. And again, one of the things that we see where technology is being incorporated at a very fast rate into whether it's equipment, tools, training, etc., is really that ability to incorporate or to use the things that people have learned over time that this was a mistake, this was a problem, whatever, and allowing someone to actually experience that in a safe environment. So again, if you think about, well, if I crash it or if I hit something, well, I can start right over again. There wasn't a loss of life, no one was hurt. Everything was done within the safe environment of this immersive virtual training option. And I know this probably seems all futuristic and everything, but again, there are firms that are actively using this, which allows them not only to assess where someone is, but how quickly they're learning, what skill sets they need to focus on more, where they light, etc. And really, when you start to think about this and look at it, it really reminds me of the quote from the science fiction writer William Gibson, who said, "The future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed." So this is an active training program that many firms are using to really create a competitive advantage, both from a marketing perspective as well as from a recruitment and training perspective. So, as I mentioned, we had interviewed several different firms that have actually used the immersive virtual reality equipment for their operator training. And when we asked them about their experience, every one of them, first of all, said that it has been a great addition to their training for many of the reasons that we've already mentioned. But the three that really stood out the most was the training being much more effective. So again, if the average people or the average response that we had to our prior study was 5 out of 10, the satisfaction with the effectiveness of the immersive VR was almost through the roof. The things that they would say about the effectiveness of it was that the simulators, they were providing that real-time feedback, not only to the operators learning more quickly, but even to the trainers and to their human resources department. So really understanding, again, where do they need to focus, where are the strengths, where are the weaknesses. We talked about engagement as sort of being an issue, but with the self-guided work and the scoring, it really increases the autonomy and the motivation of the trainer. And you think about these young people today, in virtual reality, in many cases are in their homes as a game, and so they are accustomed to that, and we're seeing that not only that, but even older generations, the amount of interaction with the virtual reality was one of the greatest benefits too that the people shared with us. And then again, as I mentioned, the ability to simulate multiple environments and conditions. Again, the ability to learn from, well, what do I do in this situation? What if this occurs, etc. The second area was actually the lowering of the cost and the risk, both from a safety perspective and equipment. I already shared with you, the incident rate and some of the cost associated with that. But again, one of the greatest benefits they said from that was that you could have these mistakes, and you could have these mistakes without consequences. Again, no one is hurt. There's no equipment that's damaged. The simulators can also save on the purchase and maintenance of real equipment. So now I'm not using my actual equipment, if you will, to be used out in the field for training perspectives, or if it's being damaged, now it's been taken offline. And it can be performed in a controlled indoor environment. So, if the weather is bad or for whatever reason, I have one place where I can do this, and I can do it on a more frequent basis than if I was having to do it in the field. And then last, and the one that was really most perhaps intriguing to us, was how several of these firms were talking about how just the use of the immersive VR, one of the unexpected benefits they had beyond just the training, the effectiveness of the training, the lowering the cost and risk, was their ability to actually attract the operators. And again, if you think about the challenges we talked about with some of the skilled labor, this was actually a net gain for many people, where if they use these in describing their company or attracting other people, it actually really created a sort of buzz, if you will, about their companies. And a part of that was because it really, as I've mentioned, it aligns with sort of the next generation, their experiences, with their expectations of working with technology, their preference of working with technology. It sort of refreshed the concept of what it was like to be in construction. It wasn't a stodgy looking kind of dangerous environment. It was something that was fresh. It was sort of on the leading edge of technology. And they could take these sort of packages or these units, these VR, on the road. So when they were going recruiting, they were actually able to show some of the ways in which they could be working with others in order to share what they were doing as an organization. And then last, just again, that greater speed to operator competency. And again, we're talking about the time that it took to actually get a equipment operator to the point that they felt that that was true competency. The stakeholders, again, when we asked them, both those who have actually used it and those just where we were able to demonstrate what this might be and get their take on it based on what their understanding or their experience with their existing training is, they estimated that the time to achieve that competency using immersive VR training, that they could almost achieve that competency in half the time that's currently required by using nothing but traditional training methods. So again, you're not only getting that speed to competency or better competency, but now you're getting it in significantly less time than what would require. And again, if we're trying to bring more and more people into the industry, we're trying to ensure that we're getting them up to speed as quickly as possible. With what this potentially means from a training perspective is nothing short of just absolutely dramatic, that we can reduce it again by almost half in that regard. And when we looked at it, it went really, it was right from 46, you think about percent of the time, down to about 21. So then the question, becomes, well, what do you do about something like this? And one of the studies that we did, Jeffrey Golden, president of Golden Construction, had participated in. We were looking at some of these technology, and what do you do then? What do you do on Monday morning? And I really liked the way that he sort of kind of characterized any type of new technology for a firm. And he really put it into these three buckets of sort of creation, innovation, and revolution. And he was saying that, essentially it's something you don't just jump right into, but you have to kind of make sure that it functionally works, with the way in which your business operates, et cetera. And then innovating so that it holistically works, or that it works across the organization. And then lastly, to revolutionize, to improve the industry. Again, not just improve for your company, but for everyone. So if we can establish that safety of bringing more immersive virtual reality training for equipment operators, then that really is improving our industry overall. So the things that you need to do is like establishing a vision, fostering that culture of innovation within your own business, and then building a talent strategy and change mindset. And my partner in this, Kim McLean, is going to talk a little bit more about some of the other options that are available to learn more about immersive VR and how you could really incorporate it into your business. Ken?
Thanks, Jay. The quote from William Gibson is an interesting one. I mean, I think that book is Neuromancer, is one of his famous books, and he was imagining things that have become real, including virtual reality and online computing and cloud computing. The latest movie, if you haven't seen it, it is more teenage-based, but Ready Player One is Steven Spielberg's new movie based on Ernst Cline's book, and it really is about virtual reality. It's a bit of a dystopian science fiction book, but it's based on virtual reality. And it's that education and awareness that we're really the stage we're at. And virtual reality is just, it has to be experienced to be understood. And part of what we're doing with United Rentals and an organization called Lights is to really create access to this experience with, no obligation, come try it for free. And it's really just a group of the early innovators. And we all know that construction is slow to adapt and adopt. And we're working with Bechtel's, United Rentals, some of the early adopters and innovators to just get people exposed to this. And as Jay was talking about the immersive technology, the haptic feedback, that's one linear approach. It's the use of VR for machine equipment operation. It's just an extension of simulation. There are other technologies that exist within VR that we're also experimenting, that you can come see at the open houses, which are really the nonlinear approach where we could all be in a room together. And you're starting to see this with some of the sporting events, where instead of having to go to the Cavs-Warriors game, we can experience that in virtual reality and pay for whichever seat we want. And we can be there without having to leave our room. That's some of the other things that William Gibson experiences about. But we invite everyone. Our next one immediately for those on the east side of the world is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. If you go to lights.org, it's free. We typically get between 60 to 100 people, so it's great networking, but a great way to just try and experience virtual reality and see if this is something that makes some sense in the near term or midterm. We also are doing open houses, and we put those dates down at United Rentals, and we're going to roll those out over the next year successively as we kind of try to introduce a concept called training centers of the future, where we start incorporating other technologies to make people safer and more confident. I guess we can move to questions. I guess just one last point. You can see the contact information for both Wade or Zach, and they can direct you to any of the other ones that may be coming to a town near you, much like Spielberg's movie. Thanks, Jay.
Thanks, Ken.
Great job, Jay and Ken. Thank you for your excellent insights and expertise. Before we start the Q&A, I want to remind everyone that the evaluation survey we're asking you to complete, the survey should be appearing on your screen now. Your input is important because it will help us improve future webcasts. If you do not see the evaluation survey on your screen, please turn off your pop-up blocker. You may also access the survey by clicking the survey button near the lower right part of your screen. As a reminder, if you want to ask a question, simply type it in the text box in the lower left-hand corner of your screen and click the button for Submit Question. Feel free to ask your question at any time. With that, let's get to the Q&A. In regards to OSHA compliance, do you have an opinion as to how OSHA views VR as a training tool?
In the research that we've done, they look at it as it would be a complement to traditional training methods. So our expectation is that that immersive VR in many cases will become a large part of what OSHA sees as a good best of class training program.
Our next question, have you encountered any VR training for carpenters using a saw, nail gun, or even using fall protection?
I personally have not. Go ahead, Ken.
Yeah, Jay, I can cover that. I mean, we've seen part of it is VR for some of the very specific tools. The fidelity of the hands, you just can't get that small right now. So in the case of some of the use for equipment, you're actually using the physical controls of the equipment, whether it's be a forklift or the aerial work platform, as you get smaller and smaller, there has been a somewhat successful with Schneider engineering around a welding device. So they actually have the physical welder that mimics the tool. The product set that's trying to solve training on tools is coming, and the gloves and the ability to kind of work to more minute screw level, nail gun level, and product level is coming as well, but probably another calendar year away before that level gets there. So that specific really welding and equipment is the stuff leading the charge right now.
Our next question, why do you think VR is finally coming to the construction and AEM industry?
Well, that's a good question. I think that in many cases the construction industry gets sort of a bad rap, and I think it's not actually an accurate one. We say that the construction industry is slow to adopt new technologies. I would say that construction in many ways has adopted a lot of new technologies. I think that part of the reason why, though VR now, is that it had to really evolve to a point where I think, particularly from an immersive side, to really be applicable to what the construction industry does. So a lot of the things that have occurred over the last couple of years, and Ken could probably even say more about this, is that the way we hear virtual reality described today is light years different than maybe what it was even just a few years ago. So the capabilities, what you can do to a measurement perspective, which is really, in my personal opinion, where the almost is equal value to the safety aspect is to be able to actually really truly measure things like eye movement, et cetera, didn't really exist, several years ago. So I think that's part of why now it's just finally reached a point of technical capability, if you will, that it makes sense.
And I think it's got to solve real big problems, of which labor shortage that Jay's research is identifying. If you don't have that catalyst, technology just is an interesting catalyst looking for a solution. And so it has to solve real problems, but also it has to be affordable, and it has to become something that people are comfortable with. So as you get through each generation, I think VR has gone through the hype cycle, and now it's proving that it can fit somewhere in the organization and solve real problems, and it's affordable. And without those things, you don't have people adopting it long term.
What do you think is the next stage of a study like this?
So I think the next stage of a study like this is partly coming up with what are some of the real true key performance indicators of virtual reality or of immersive virtual reality for operator training. That really, so that someone could truly measure and say this really is the measurable advantages or benefits that it provides. And then second, I think is really, where do you expand this to? And we've talked primarily about aerial lift and mobile elevated work platforms and cranes, but a lot of the individuals that we've surveyed and the companies that we've interviewed really see applicability to this to multiple types of equipment, whether it's earth moving or other things. So I think the next step is where can you take this beyond just the elevated work platforms and the cranes.
Our next question, what other types of heavy equipment are available for training, perhaps like front-end loaders?
I'll answer that one, Jay. I mean, that's actually what we're working on with United Rentals on. Great question for the developer. We're working with United Rentals to build out their other pieces of equipment, front-end loaders, skid steers, forklifts. And part of what happens in technology is you create it for scale. You create your design and development for scale, so it's a lot easier to add new products. A good example is cranes. You have all the different types of cranes. Once you get some of the physics right and some of the complexities around what needs to be integrated from the training side, what lessons need to be learned, what you're evaluating, it's easy to replicate that. So the next products are front-end loaders, skid steer, and forklifts with United Rentals. And we are looking at some other ones in the oil and gas industry. We've built some snubbing VR, and those are the ones we're working on, plus all the crane models through our partner, which is Bechtel and ITI.
Our next question, I know at this session this is focused on equipment, but is anyone looking at using this technology for excavation, confined spaces, etc.?
Jay, I can take that question.
Okay.
For sure, and that's actually one of the best uses of it, and we do that now, or companies do that generally. Confined space is a great example, or working at height. You can mimic something that you otherwise might not know. It's like getting an MRI and finding out you're claustrophobic. It's nice to know that before you work in confined spaces. Virtual reality, the experience and fidelity is so real that in fact you can just do very base case training around that. You can also create procedural, repeatable training for routine tools, including the confined space and working at heights to create that experience without having to do it. I think I answered that. Sorry, I lost my train of thought.
Our next question, can VR training come in multiple languages?
That's called localization, and as long as you have the base training, you can put whatever language you want. It's just like translating a movie to whatever multiple languages and inflections. The trick with that is actually making sure you get the vernacular right for, what might be said in Spanish or French for a piece of equipment, and making sure that you have someone that really understands that and not just doing a Google translation. But we do that already in a number of different languages, and it's called localization It's called localization.
Our next question, are equipment manufacturers developing VR training for their specific equipment models?
We did not come across any of the equipment manufacturers doing it in our research. That does not mean that they could be working on it, but we have not come across any examples of any equipment manufacturers doing it at this time or having a product available at this time.
As a developer, we are trying to work directly with the manufacturers. We've seen a couple doing it on their own. We believe being Switzerland and trying to work with all of them, whether it's the different crane manufacturers, of which there's numerous. It's about trying to build it once and be the leader in that category so that people can learn cranes generally, and then any of the specific controls and other, we try to modify the training if they are just strictly a Cadano shop, for example. But I haven't seen a lot of manufacturers really chasing this directly. It's maybe not their core business.
Our last question, will VR replace in-person evaluation? Can it be more consistent and actually more accurate in evaluating an operator?
It's a good question whether it can replace in-person evaluation, but it can be a complement to that, potentially near term. One of the things that we did look at was the value of something equivalent to a FICO score that you could develop through the use of the VR, again, because you could measure so many things that really aren't capable under a traditional format. And we did find that the vast majority of people found that such a FICO score, if you will, for the training or the operator training would be of tremendous value.
Finally, what is sorry, one more question. What is the name of the VR company?
Serious Labs.
.com.
All right, thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, we have run out of time. I'm sorry we didn't get to everyone's questions, but all of today's unanswered questions will be forwarded to our speaker. Once again, I hope you take the time to fill out the evaluation survey on your screen to give us your feedback. That ends today's Safety and Health webcast. I'd like to thank Jay Bowman, Ken McLean, everyone at United Academy, FMI Consulting, United Rentals, the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades, and Sirius Labs, and of course all of our listeners. Have a safe day.
Thank you.